Angela Carter was known in her town as a quiet woman who lived on the edge of the countryside. Her small farmhouse stood alone on wide open land, surrounded by fields of corn, a vegetable garden, and a red barn where she kept chickens, goats, and 2 horses. To anyone who passed by, her life looked calm and ordinary. Neighbors waved to her from the road, and she always waved back with a polite smile. Children sometimes came by to feed her chickens, and she gave them fresh eggs in return. She seemed like a gentle farmer who lived simply, with nothing more on her mind than the weather and her crops. But behind her calm eyes, there was a story no one in the town really knew. Angela had chosen this quiet life on purpose. She had once lived a very different life, one filled with danger, discipline, and secrets. Years ago, Angela had served in the military. Not just as any soldier, but as one of the most skilled snipers her division had ever known. Her name was written in records and medals, but she never spoke of it. When she returned home, she left that life behind, carrying only memories and the lessons of discipline. She wanted peace now. She wanted the sound of the wind in the fields, the smell of the earth after rain, and the comfort of silence. In town, people wondered sometimes why Angela never married or had a family. She was in her late 40s, strong and graceful, with dark eyes that seemed to notice everything. A shopkeeper once whispered, "That woman sees right through you." Others said she was private, maybe even lonely, but no one knew the truth. Angela didn't mind the talk. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than words. She kept her life simple, working her farm, fixing her fences, and caring for her animals. She rose before dawn, worked until sunset, and found joy in small things like a bird building a nest or a new calf taking its first steps. Every morning she carried a steaming cup of coffee to her porch and sat watching the horizon. From that porch she could see miles of open land. Her trained eyes caught the smallest movements, the flick of a rabbit's ear in the grass, a hawk circling in the distance, the way the corn shifted in the breeze. She noticed things others would never stop to see. It was the old part of her that never faded, the part that had once been trained to observe every detail. She sometimes laughed softly to herself at how that skill still lived within her, even though she now used it for nothing more than noticing life on the farm. Her neighbors liked her, though they never really knew her. Old Mr. Jenkins, who lived 2 miles away, often borrowed her tools. "Angela," he'd say, "you're sharper than any man I know. You always fix things better than me." She'd smile and help him without complaint. Children admired her too. They loved how she could whistle and have her dogs sit still at her feet. Some people whispered that she must have been a teacher once, or maybe worked in the city. Nobody ever guessed that she had once been a Marine who had walked through deserts and jungles, who had faced storms of fire and shadow, who had looked through the scope of a rifle with steady hands while the world around her shook with chaos. At night, Angela sometimes sat by the fireplace in her small living room. The glow of the flames lit up the walls, where simple pictures hung, her parents, a few landscapes, and one old photo of her in uniform tucked into a frame that she rarely let anyone see. It was her quiet reminder of who she was and who she had chosen to become. She didn't regret leaving that world. She knew she had done her part. But deep inside, she also knew that part of her would always remain, ready if ever needed again. Life moved slowly on her farm. She tilled the soil with her hands, mended fences, carried heavy feed sacks on her shoulders, and cut wood with a rhythm that showed both strength and patience. There was grace in the way she worked, almost like every movement was practiced. In town, the younger farmers sometimes joked that Angela worked harder than men half her age. She would laugh softly but never argue. Hard work was part of her blood. The town where Angela lived was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone else. People gathered on Sundays in the church or met at the diner on Main Street for coffee and pie. Angela came into town once a week for supplies. She walked calmly, greeted people kindly, and left quickly. Though she kept to herself, her presence was felt. People respected her without even realizing why. Something about the way she carried herself made them pause. It was as if they could sense she had lived through things they could not imagine. Sometimes at night, when the fields were silent and the sky was heavy with stars, Angela would sit outside on her porch and listen. The night was filled with sounds: the rustle of leaves, the call of crickets, the distant howl of coyotes. Her dogs lay at her feet, ears perked, but always calm. She loved these moments most of all, when peace wrapped around her like a blanket. Yet, in those same moments, her mind could slip back to the days of patrols in foreign lands, where every sound meant survival. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that she had earned this peace. Angela never boasted about her past, nor did she hide from it. She simply carried it with dignity. She was not the kind of woman who looked for trouble, nor the kind who ignored it when it came. She believed in fairness, in protecting the weak, and in living honestly. These values guided her every day on the farm. They were values that had been tested in the hardest of times and had never left her. For now, the farm gave her the life she wanted. She fed her animals in the morning, sold fresh produce to the local market, and sometimes offered help to struggling neighbors. People thought she was just kind, but what they didn't see was that she was also watching, always aware, always ready. Her life looked simple, but it was built on layers of discipline and strength. No one in town could have guessed how much her past still lived in her. To them, Angela was just the quiet woman at the edge of town. To her, the farm was more than a home. It was a place of healing, a place where she chose peace over chaos, a place where the sound of birds replaced the sound of gunfire. But in the shadows beyond the fields, trouble was beginning to grow. Unseen, unheard, a storm was preparing to enter her calm life. And though Angela did not yet know it, her past, the part of her she thought she had left behind, was about to rise again. The weeks passed quietly on Angela's farm, and the warm sun of late summer painted the fields golden. She rose early each morning, fed her animals, and worked the land with steady patience. To anyone watching, nothing seemed unusual. The small farmhouse stood in peace, the barn doors opened wide, and the fields swayed in the breeze. Yet, something in the air was changing. Trouble was moving closer, though Angela's neighbors were too distracted by daily life to notice. A gang had begun making its presence felt in the area. At first, their acts seemed small: an abandoned shed vandalized, a few tools stolen, or fences broken late at night. Farmers brushed it off as careless kids, but soon the pattern grew darker. Livestock went missing, tractors were stripped for parts, and barns were burned. People grew nervous. The sheriff, a tired man who worked alone with little support, tried to keep up, but the countryside stretched for miles, and he could not be everywhere at once. Whispers spread through town that a group of men had arrived from outside, restless and hungry for quick gain. Angela listened quietly to the talk in the diner one morning when she came to town for supplies. The farmers gathered around their coffee mugs, shaking their heads and muttering about the gang. "They hit the Peterson place last week," one said. "Took 3 cows and left the barn doors wide open. Poor old Peterson couldn't do a thing." Another man leaned closer. "Sheriff says he's watching, but we all know he can't stop them. They pick their time, and by the time help arrives, it's too late." Everyone in the diner nodded, frustration heavy in the air. Angela didn't add her voice to the conversation. She simply sipped her coffee and listened. Her sharp eyes watched the men at the counter, the way their shoulders slumped, the worry written on their faces. She felt the same concern, but she kept it to herself. Speaking too much never solved problems. Actions did. When she drove back to her farm that afternoon, she noticed signs others might have missed. A broken branch near the edge of her driveway, tire tracks leading away from the dirt road, a fence post leaning at an odd angle. To anyone else, it might look like nothing. To Angela, it told a story. Someone had been near her land, Someone testing, someone watching. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel but kept her face calm. At night, when the farm lay in darkness and the fields whispered with the wind, Angela sat on her porch with her dogs at her feet. She listened to the night as she always did. But this time, she heard something different, a distant sound of an engine cutting off, footsteps crunching faintly on gravel, then fading away. Whoever it was didn't come closer, but she knew enough to understand. Someone had been near, testing boundaries, just as they had done with others. She leaned back in her chair, her mind sharp. Angela didn't panic. Fear was not in her nature. Instead, she moved quietly the next day through her farm, checking locks, repairing weak spots in her fences, and storing away supplies. She didn't want a fight, but she believed in being prepared. She took down a wooden chest from the attic, one that had been sitting there untouched for years. Inside lay a few reminders of her past: a worn uniform folded with care, a medal wrapped in cloth, and her old field gear. She didn't need much, but she checked the equipment with practiced hands, making sure everything still worked as it should. Her movements were calm, almost graceful, as though she were simply repairing tools for the farm. The gang, meanwhile, was growing bolder. They had struck 2 more farms by the end of the week. People began to lock themselves in at night, and some even spoke of leaving the area. But Angela stayed the same. She carried her baskets to market, fed her horses, and tended her garden. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet inside her mind, she was watching, calculating, and waiting. She knew they would come eventually. Her farm looked like an easy target to outsiders: an older woman living alone, wide land with animals and crops, no one nearby to help. To them, it would look like an open door. One evening, Angela walked the boundary of her land as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and purple. She paused near the old oak tree at the far end of her property. From there, she could see the road that curved past her farm. In the distance, a black truck slowed, then rolled on. Its windows were dark, and its engine rumbled low. She watched it disappear, her face calm but her mind alert. They were scouting. She could feel it in her bones. Her dogs barked more often at night now, sensing what she already knew. The farm animals grew restless too, as if nature itself could sense the coming storm. Angela didn't speak of it to anyone. She knew her neighbors would only worry more, and besides, they couldn't help. This was her land, her responsibility. She had faced storms greater than this before. She only hoped that peace might still hold, that maybe the gang would pass her by. But she doubted it. People like them didn't pass by easy targets. One night, the air grew unusually still. Angela sat by the window, the glow of her lamp soft on the table. She heard her horses snort nervously in the barn. Her dogs stood, ears pricked, staring toward the road. Then came the sound, the distant hum of an engine slowing near her property, headlights briefly flashing across the far field before vanishing. She stayed quiet, heart steady, breath calm. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement near her fence line. Shadows shifted, paused, and then retreated back into the darkness. It was only a test. But it told her enough. Angela leaned back in her chair. Trouble was no longer a rumor, it was here. They hadn't struck yet, but they would. She could feel the weight of it pressing closer, like a storm cloud gathering above the farm. She stood, walked to the back room, and placed her hand on the wooden chest once more. She didn't open it this time. She only stood there in silence, her eyes firm. She didn't want to awaken the old part of herself, but if the gang forced her hand, they would learn that the woman they thought was only a farmer was something far more. For now, she waited. She fed her chickens in the morning, smiled at the children who waved from the road, and worked her land as though nothing had changed. But in the quiet corners of her life, she was ready. Trouble might be coming, but she had faced storms before. and if this gang chose her farm, they would discover the truth hidden behind her quiet smile and calm eyes. The night the gang finally came to Angela's farm began like any other. The air was warm, the crickets sang their steady chorus, and the wide fields stretched out in silver light under the moon. Angela finished her evening chores slowly, as if nothing in the world was different. She locked the barn doors, checked on the horses, and filled the water troughs. Her dogs followed her closely, their ears twitching at every distant sound. They felt it too. Something was near, something waiting. Angela moved calmly through the house, closing the windows and setting her lamp low. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, her eyes on the open road that cut through the countryside. The road was quiet, but her instincts told her it wouldn't stay that way. She had lived long enough, seen enough, to know the stillness before a storm. She sipped her tea slowly, her face calm, but her mind sharp as steel. Far down the road, the faint glow of headlights appeared. They flickered, dimmed, then went dark as the vehicle slowed. Angela set her cup down quietly. Her dogs rose, standing alert by the door, their low growls breaking the silence. The sound of an engine idling reached her ears, muffled but steady. Then it cut off, and the night grew heavy with quiet once more. Shadows moved at the edge of her field. 3 figures at first, then more, slipping through the tall grass, thinking they were unseen. But Angela had already marked their steps, counted their number, measured their pace. Her eyes narrowed slightly. This was no friendly visit. It was the raid she had been expecting. The gang thought her farm would be easy. An older woman, living alone, no one nearby to call for help. They came laughing in low voices, their flashlights slicing through the dark, pointing toward the barn, the coop, the farmhouse itself. They were bold, certain that nothing stood in their way. Angela stood slowly, moving with the same calm rhythm she always carried. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She reached for the chest she had prepared days earlier and lifted the lid. Inside was her old gear, kept with care. She didn't need much. A small toolkit, a pair of binoculars, and her most trusted companion from her days in service, a precision rifle, polished and oiled, wrapped in cloth. She held it with quiet respect, as if greeting an old friend. She never wished to use it again, but life had its own way of testing her. She stepped onto her porch, the cool night air brushing her face. The dogs followed close but silent now, trained by her tone. Angela crouched low, her eyes scanning the dark fields. The gang had split into groups, some near the barn, some moving toward the house. She knew their plan without hearing a word. They would take the animals first, then break inside, thinking she was too weak to stop them. Angela moved like a shadow herself, circling the side of the house, keeping to cover, every step deliberate. She reached the old oak tree at the edge of her yard, a spot she had chosen days before as her lookout. From there she could see everything: the barn, the fences, the men moving carelessly through her land. She lifted her rifle, adjusted her scope, and looked through with eyes that hadn't lost their sharpness. The years melted away. She was once again the sniper who had watched over her unit in deserts, forests, and mountains. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steady, her hands still. One man raised a crowbar to break into the barn. Angela exhaled softly, adjusted her aim, and with a sharp crack of precision, she sent a warning shot that struck the metal lock of the barn door, sparks flying. The man froze, stumbling backward in shock. Another shouted, startled, shining his flashlight wildly into the dark. They had no idea where it came from. The dogs barked loudly now, their deep voices rolling across the fields. Panic rippled through the gang. They had come expecting an easy raid, but instead, they felt an unseen force watching them, controlling the ground beneath their feet. Another man tried to open the gate, but before his hand reached it, a bullet clipped the wooden post beside him, splinters flying. He dropped the latch instantly, fear in his eyes. "She's shooting at us," he yelled, though he couldn't see from where. Angela didn't move from her cover. She worked with calm focus, her shots precise but careful, never hitting them, only the ground, the fences, the locks, the metal of their tools. Each sound echoed like thunder in their ears. She wanted them to know they were not welcome, that this land was not theirs to touch. The gang scrambled, whispering harshly to one another, but their voices carried in the still night. "Where is she? I don't see her. It's just some woman, how can she?" Another shot cracked, hitting the dirt inches from their boots. They jumped back, their confidence unraveling. Angela's face remained calm, her breathing slow. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even frightened. She was simply in control, as she had been trained to be. Every shot was a message: "You are not safe here, you have made a mistake." From her position, she could see them debating, their bravado slipping away. One tried to move toward the truck, but Angela put a round through the air that shattered the side mirror. The sharp glass rained down, and the man ducked, cursing under his breath. The truck was useless now, trapped without its driver's nerve. The leader of the gang, a tall man with a heavy jacket, tried to rally his crew. He shouted for them to keep moving, to push forward. But Angela's next shot rang out, this time striking the dirt so close to his feet that he leapt back, his voice faltering. The men looked at him with doubt, their courage breaking. He had no plan for this. He had thought they were hunting, but now they realized they were being hunted instead. The minutes stretched like hours. The men huddled together near the fence, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Angela lowered her rifle for a moment and simply watched. She knew fear when she saw it. These men were no longer raiders, they were intruders desperate to escape the eyes they couldn't see. Finally, one of them shouted, "We need to get out of here." Another agreed quickly, and then another. The leader tried to argue, but his words were drowned out by the sound of retreating footsteps. The men scrambled toward their truck, tripping in the grass, dragging one another in haste. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped away, tires spinning on the dirt road, leaving only dust behind. Angela remained still, her rifle steady, her eyes following until the red glow of the tail lights vanished into the distance. Only then did she lower her weapon, exhaling a long, steady breath. Her dogs came to her side, their tails wagging now that the threat was gone. She knelt, patting their heads gently. "Good work," she whispered, though it was her calm strength that had carried the night. She stood under the moonlight, the fields stretching silent around her once more. To the world, it looked like nothing had happened. But Angela knew the truth. The gang had tested her, and they had learned what no one in town yet understood. She was not just a farmer. She was something else, something they would never forget. As she walked back to her porch, the cool night air brushed against her face. She set her rifle back into its case, closed the chest, and sat with her tea once more, as though nothing had changed. But she knew it had. The gang would not forget this night. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The raid had failed, but the gang was not ready to give up. They were humiliated that night, frightened by the invisible hand that had struck fear into their hearts, but pride can be heavier than fear. Their leader, a man who had built his reputation on power and intimidation, could not stand the idea that his crew had run away from one woman. In the dark corners of a nearby town, he told his men they would return. They would come back stronger, in greater numbers, and show everyone that no farmer could stand in their way. His words gave them some courage again, but deep inside, each man carried the memory of those warning shots and the cold silence of that farm under the moonlight. Angela, meanwhile, carried on with her life as if nothing had changed. She milked her goats in the morning, tended to her garden, and carried her baskets to market. People in town noticed nothing different. To them, she was still the quiet woman who lived at the edge of the fields. But inside, Angela knew the gang's story was not over. Men like that did not disappear after one defeat. They were likely regrouping, building anger out of their shame, and she prepared herself with calm patience. The days passed in uneasy peace. Angela moved through her routines, but her instincts were sharper than ever. At night, she slept lightly, waking at the faintest sound. Her dogs kept watch with her, their ears pricked at every whisper of the wind. She walked her land carefully each morning, noting small changes: a broken twig, boot prints near the far fence, the faint smell of cigarette smoke carried on the breeze. She read the land like a book, and the signs told her what she already knew. They would come back. And they did. It was a colder night this time, the air crisp and the stars bright. Angela was sitting at her table, writing in a worn notebook, when the sound came again: the low rumble of engines in the distance. She set her pen down, listening. 2 engines this time, not 1. They grew louder, then cut off at once. Silence fell heavy over the fields. Her dogs growled low, their fur bristling as they looked toward the road. Angela rose calmly, no fear in her step. She had been waiting. The men came in larger numbers now, their shadows moving through the fields like restless waves. Flashlights darted across the fences, sweeping over the barn and the farmhouse. There was no laughter this time, only the sharp calls of men trying to sound brave. They were cautious now, but their numbers gave them confidence. They thought numbers could win against skill. Angela stepped onto her porch, her rifle resting in her hands. She did not hide this time. The moonlight touched her face, calm and steady, as her voice carried across the fields. "That's far enough." The men froze. Her tone was quiet but commanding, the kind of voice that left no room for doubt. One man raised his flashlight toward her, squinting to see. The leader barked a laugh, though it was thin and forced. "It's just a woman. Don't let her scare you." Angela's eyes didn't waver. "You've made a mistake," she said simply. "This land is not yours. Leave now, and you'll still walk away." The leader stepped forward, anger flashing across his face. "You think you can scare us with a few shots in the dark? You don't know who we are." Angela tilted her head slightly, her rifle held with quiet confidence. "And you don't know who I am." Her words carried a weight the men didn't understand at first. But then she raised her rifle with practiced precision and fired a single shot into the ground at the leader's feet. The earth kicked up, and he stumbled back, his men flinching. This time, they had seen her clearly, her stance unshaken, her aim perfect. Whispers moved through the group. One man muttered, "She's not just some farmer. Nobody shoots like that." Another, eyes wide, said, "I've heard stories. There was a Marine sniper, a legend, could it be her?" The leader tried to hush them, but the doubt had already spread. Angela lowered her rifle slightly, her eyes never leaving theirs. "I served this country when most of you were still learning how to stand. I've walked through places where silence meant survival and precision meant life. They called me one of the best, but I didn't stay for the medals. I stayed for the people who needed protecting. And I'll do the same here." The men shifted uneasily. Some lowered their weapons. The weight of her words pressed on them heavier than any bullet. They had come to rob a farm, but they had found something they couldn't have imagined. This woman was no simple farmer. She was the shadow from their nightmares, the unseen hand that could end their plans before they began. Angela took one slow step forward. Her dog stood at her side, silent but fierce. "You think you bring fear," she said, her voice steady. "But fear doesn't live here. Leave now, or I will show you what it means to face someone who does not miss." The silence stretched. The men looked at one another, doubt cracking through their bravado. Some whispered to the leader, urging him to turn back. His pride battled with his survival, but his crew was already breaking. The fear from the first night had returned, stronger now that they had seen her clearly, heard her words, and felt the truth of who she was. One man dropped his crowbar to the dirt with a clatter. Another lowered his flashlight, stepping back. Soon more followed, retreating slowly, their courage slipping away. The leader cursed under his breath, but he could not hold them. He looked at Angela one last time, his eyes burning with anger but also with fear, then turned and stalked back toward the trucks. The engines roared to life, and once again, the gang fled into the night, leaving only dust behind. Angela watched them go, her expression calm. She did not celebrate, nor did she relax too soon. She knew men like that sometimes returned again, driven not by need but by pride. Yet she also knew something had shifted tonight. They had seen her for who she truly was. The mask of the quiet farmer had fallen, and the truth of the Marine sniper had risen in its place. She walked back to her porch, her dogs following closely. She set her rifle down gently, her hands steady. She looked out over her land, the moonlight shining across the fields she loved so much. Her life of peace had been disturbed, but she had defended it without hesitation. The land was still hers, the night still hers, and her spirit unbroken. Inside, she poured herself another cup of tea and sat at the table. She picked up her notebook, wrote a few lines about the night, and closed it softly. To her, this was not about glory or victory. It was about protecting what mattered, the way she had always done. She had left the battlefield years ago, but the discipline, the skill, and the courage had never left her. And though the gang had run once more, Angela knew the story was not finished. The sheriff would hear of it soon, the town would whisper of the mysterious woman who had stood against danger, and the gang would decide whether pride would drive them back again. She sat quietly, her eyes thoughtful, as the firelight flickered against the walls. She did not fear what came next. She was ready, just as she had always been. The days following the second raid brought a strange quiet to the countryside. Word of what had happened on Angela Carter's farm began to travel, first in whispers between farmers, then as stories told in the diner and the feed store. No one knew exactly what took place, but everyone agreed on one thing: the gang had gone in, and they had come out shaken. A few men in town swore they heard them muttering in fear, speaking about a woman who could hit a target in the dark without ever missing. Some laughed at the tale, brushing it off as exaggeration. But others, those who knew Angela's calm, watchful eyes, wondered if perhaps there was truth in it. Angela herself said nothing. She moved through her days as she always did, tending to her land, repairing fences, and feeding her animals. To those who saw her, she looked unchanged, as though her life had not been touched by trouble. But in the quiet of her porch, as the sun set and the world turned golden, she knew the peace she had built was more fragile now. Once a secret is touched, it can no longer remain fully hidden. The gang, humiliated twice, struggled with their pride. Some wanted to return again, to prove they were not weak. Others wanted nothing to do with the woman on the farm, whispering that she was no ordinary farmer, that she carried a past none of them could fight. In the end, their arguments spilled into public acts of recklessness, breaking into smaller crimes in town, where they drew the sheriff's attention more openly. It was only a matter of time before the law caught up with them. The sheriff, a man who had known Angela for years but never truly known her, drove out to her farm one morning after hearing the rumors. His old truck rattled up the driveway, dust swirling behind it. Angela met him on the porch, wiping her hands on a cloth after finishing her chores. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, her tone calm as ever. He tipped his hat, his eyes studying her. "Morning, Angela. Thought I'd come by and ask a question or two." She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. They settled on the porch, the dogs lying nearby, the fields stretching wide under the morning sun. For a while, the sheriff said nothing, just sipping the coffee she poured him. Finally, he leaned forward. People in town are talking. They say that gang that's been giving us trouble, well, they came out here. Twice. And twice they left quicker than they came. You know anything about that? Angela looked out at the fields, her expression unreadable. They were here, she admitted simply. Thought they could take what didn't belong to them. And, the sheriff pressed gently. Angela's eyes met his, steady and calm. I reminded them this land is not theirs. The sheriff studied her a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. There was a flicker of understanding in his gaze, though she had given him little detail. He let out a slow sigh. Whatever you did, Angela, I reckon you saved me and half this county a whole lot of trouble. Those men won't be forgetting your place anytime soon. She didn't respond with pride. Instead, she only nodded. I don't want trouble, Sheriff. I only want to live my life in peace. He gave her a small smile. Peace isn't always something you find. Sometimes you have to make it yourself. You've always been good at that. Not long after, the sheriff and his deputies caught most of the gang in town during a botched theft. Their leader, pride broken and spirit weakened, was taken into custody, his power stripped away. News spread quickly that the gang was finished, and the farms around Angela's land began to breathe easier again. Families returned to sleeping soundly at night. Neighbors thanked the sheriff, but in quiet corners they also spoke of the mysterious strength of Angela Carter, the woman who had faced what others feared. One evening, when the sky burned with the colors of sunset, a few neighbors stopped by her farm. They brought pies, fresh bread, and warm words of thanks. Angela accepted their kindness with a gentle smile, though she did not speak of what had happened. She listened, nodding as they shared their relief that the gang was gone. When they left, she stood by the gate, watching their wagons disappear down the road, her heart touched by their gratitude but also humbled. She had not done it for thanks. She had done it because it was right. The truth of her past was no longer a complete secret, though. Children whispered that she was a hero in disguise, adults spoke with quiet respect, and the sheriff treated her with a new weight in his voice when he called her name. Some tried to ask directly, but Angela never offered details. She did not want to relive those chapters, not in stories or in glory. She wanted the earth under her hands, the peace of her porch, the joy of watching her animals grow. The past had shaped her, but it did not define her every day. The nights on the farm slowly returned to their calm rhythm. Angela sat with her tea on the porch, her dogs at her feet, the stars glittering above. The air was once again filled with the soft hum of crickets and the rustle of the fields. She breathed deeply, letting the peace wrap around her like a blanket. She thought of the raids not with anger, but with clarity. Trouble had come, and she had faced it, just as she had faced every storm in her life. And now, just as always, she returned to the quiet she loved. The sheriff visited from time to time, sometimes with no reason at all, just to sit and share a cup of coffee. Neighbors waved a little longer when she came into town, and children stared with wide eyes as though she were larger than life. Angela smiled kindly but carried herself the same way she always had, with humility, strength, and calm. One morning, as the sun rose in shades of pink and gold, Angela walked through her fields. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the earth smelled rich and new. She paused by the old oak tree at the edge of her land, the very spot she had once used as her watch point. She placed a hand on its rough bark and closed her eyes for a moment. It reminded her of who she was, both the woman of peace and the marine of strength. Both lived inside her, and both had their place. As she walked back toward her farmhouse, she felt a deep sense of balance. She knew trouble could come again someday, life always had its storms. But she also knew she would be ready, not because she sought it, but because she had the strength to face it. Her life was not about fear, nor about pride. It was about living true to who she was, protecting what mattered, and finding peace in the simple beauty of each day. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire, Angela sat on her porch once more. The fields stretched wide, the animals settled in the barn, and the world around her grew still. She lifted her cup of tea, her eyes soft with quiet thought. The farm was her home, her refuge, and her future. And though few truly understood the depth of the woman who lived there, those who had crossed her path would never forget. She was Angela Carter, the quiet farmer, the kind neighbor, and the legendary Marine sniper who chose peace, yet never forgot how to defend it.